or I can cut.
There we go, because Michael was just saying we might say something important and not hit record soon enough. And he's not wrong. We've had, I think we've lost 15, 20 minutes of discussion sometimes, not hitting record soon enough. So welcome back. If I can move my mic out of the way, doing a little technical stuff here as we're getting started. So I'm, as I was about to say, I think what I want to talk about today for the first, at least our first little bit here, this next podcast episode, I want to focus on, it's essentially in a general sense, it's email, but it's also like communication and things like that, as far as like timings, and particularly because we've got so many tools out there that we communicate with, that I think I want to dive into that and sort of give you a little bit of a like a hot seat thing too, because I want to talk about my thoughts on a couple of these tools like Slack and text and email, and I want to hear your thoughts as well. And I think they're different for the next generation, the millennials and such that are even younger than us that are coming in. But I think it's an important thing that we need to, make clear. So I think this will be a fun little, it's a little bit of a side trip for us. And then we'll, between now and the next time, next 30 minutes, so we'll figure out what our next episode is going to be. And it may be a follow-up, but I figured I'd just dive right into this. Sound good?
Sure. In the context, are you thinking just the different ways that we can communicate within our industry, business, whatever?
More or less, yeah. I mean, it's just like there's so many. I think it's almost everybody these days. I mean, you find all sorts of groups that professional, personal communication, and now they cross lines so much as well, have all these different ways we communicate. And I think there's, in some cases, we just feel like, particularly as a professional, we feel like we just have to like respond immediately. If we get a Slack message at 3 a.m, we have to respond. And that's not really true. And so that's where I want to talk a little bit about that and what I'm thinking. And a little bit of it is, I guess, self-defense, self-care, things like that, so that you're not getting sucked into stuff that you don't want to. And I've had more than a few cases of that I've done it. And then also recently that I've had conversations that I've accidentally pulled other people in. And it's like, wait a minute, like, you didn't really need to do that. I didn't mean for you to be up till 1 a.m. struggling through this thing. I just like threw a little question out. So I figure that's probably a good little topic for us to go into. Sound
Yeah. Do
good?
you want to include any of the focus things that certain apps and technologies have also thrown out there? Since you did mention kind of quality of life, work-life
Yeah.
balance.
I mean, if there's stuff like that, anything that comes to mind, because this is really just, like I said, this is one of those, it's like, hey, it's about beer o'clock and we're going to sit down and just talk about like, hey, what is your experience with this? And sort of see where it goes.
Sure, works for me.
Awesome. Well, hello and welcome back. You're here. We're here. We're going to have a conversation and we're going to talk today about communication, but more specifically, tools and expectations. I'm Rob Broadhead. I'm one of the founders of Developreneur / Building Better Developers. And on the other side is Michael. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Malash. I'm also one of the co-founders of Developreneur and also founder of Envision QA.
So today, we are going to first, I'm going to sort of give my thoughts on a couple of, we'll call them families of communication tools, and sort of the expectations that I think are there. And these have grown up over the years where some of these things didn't even exist when I started out. Things like, actually, most of this stuff did not exist. We didn't have text messages. We had email. That was about it. And we had news groups, which is a whole different thing that nobody, I think, even follows anymore. But now there's so many different ways to do it. And then because they've come along really in a very short period of time, 5 to 10 years when you think about professions and careers and things like that, that's actually a portion of somebody's career or professional development or the existence of a company and organization. And so I want to talk a little bit about standards. And if they're not standards that are out there, it's maybe how you want to go set your own standards or work with your organization to do them. First thing, and this is a little bit of a surprise to Michael. I was just like, hey, here's a cool thing. So I'm going to throw this out to him. So apologies if he stumbles or fumbles. It's my fault, not his, because I like just, threw him a curveball. Now, the reason that this popped up is because I've had, just in the recent weeks, I've had a couple of instances where I've had somebody reach out to me via various forms, and I ended up responding faster than they expected. And I ended up sort of like disrupting my life when it really wasn't needed. It wasn't an emergency, which is not always a fun thing. It's like, hey, if you can push it back, you don't need to disrupt your life. I've also had people that I've reached out to and I've thrown something out there, and the next thing I know, they just spent 5 hours working through something when I really didn't need them to do that. It was one of those like, hey, if you've got time. And so there's also a clarification of our communications that I'm going to touch on. Now, the first thing is I want to talk about a couple of families of communication types that we have now. And the one is the instant. And there's sort of two levels of each of these. And so for instance, let's think of direct personal, and then there's also professional. So for an instant, personal would be text message because it's your phone. Presumably, you're carrying your phone. Unless it's a business phone, then okay, it's a business text. But most people, you've got your personal number. Somebody sends you a personal text. That's an instant, practically like somebody poking you on the shoulder saying, "Hey," kind of thing. Professional sense would be more like our messaging tools that we are typically logged into during the day, such as Slack. Now, those because we are, they're much more passive and much less active. Then I think there is a different level of expectation of responses to those. And then we move sort of beyond that. We get into more of the, we'll call them like the dialogue type things, which could be a text message, depending on how you do it. But more often it's going to be something like mail message. Email is going to be pretty common for that. There may also be postings that you would put on and particularly not live, not the kinds of tools people are constantly logged into. Like Slack, you're probably going to be logged into all day, or Teams. But if it's a LinkedIn message or Facebook message or social site message, that's something that, you may or may not get to that. So it probably has a lower priority and a lower guarantee of you being available. Now, your mileage may vary. So you may be somebody that is always on Snapchat or something like that. And I know people like that or Facebook, and nobody's on Facebook all the time, I guess, but there are tools out there that people are on it all the time, and your friends and your family maybe, and even maybe your profession, depending on what profession you're in, they may know that, and they may use that tool for that instant messaging. And they're expecting you to, they're going to send it and they expect you to read it within, say, a minute or so. That's your instant message style versus something that's like, you'll probably read it in the next few hours. And then there's the longer term stuff that typically has been email or even leaving a voicemail, which is like you'll get back to it within one business day or something like that. Now, from your expectations, and this is both sides of it, think about the expectations of the immediacy of the communication form you're sending, whether you're sending something or receiving something. So particularly if I ask Michael, if I say, hey, can you check out this site? If I send him a text, then I'm probably expecting him to take a look at it like right now. It's either that or it's one of two things. It's that, and he knows this, but or I'm out somewhere and I just need to do that. And we'll do this sometime. I just need to do it before I forget. And usually that's what we will do because we want to be clear. Is if there's a text, it's going to say, hey, check out this site. I just found it. Just wanted to let you know, something along those lines. If it's something that is, and it's usually going to be more personal on that side. If it's something more professional, then we'll probably hit each other up on like a Slack or somewhere like that, where that person is probably available and it's probably going to be viewed during working hours. And so if you're getting something during working hours, it's probably work-related stuff. It's something that from your professional point of view, you need to take a look into it. If you're getting something on a personal channel like a text, then if it's work, it's usually going to be considered emergency, like urgent. Because if I get a text like I did today, I've got a customer that can reach me via Upwork. He can reach me via email. He can reach me via Teams. He can reach me via text. And something came up to the point where he had like sent something on Teams. He had some urgency, so he escalated it and sent me a text. And I was like, oh yeah, I've missed that. Cool. And so took care of that literally right before this call started, because it was like, hey, I can take care of this quickly. And that's part of, I think, the expectations. If it's a text, it's either blowing up, critical, got to be fixed right now, or I'm expecting that this is something that you can just like knock out real quick. And it's just going to be sort of like, hey, before we forget, can we do this real fast? If it's on a Slack or some channel like that, then it's going to be, again, usually uh, a self-defined unit of work. Keep it, you don't want to, you're not going to have like big, long text messages or Slack messages. You might, but you probably shouldn't, because people aren't going to want to read through that whole thing. They're going to keep it like a bullet point kind of level. Send that to them. They'll address it, and vice versa. Once you get it, you can take a look at it, address your item, respond to it, say, hey, we got it, move on. If you need to do something that's longer, there is this thing called a phone. So you can pick that up and call them. You can schedule a meeting via like a Zoom or something like that. You may jump on to one of the varying ways that you can do a remote call, remote conference, which is, whether it's a video phone call or whether it's through one of your tools. And then you've got the longer thing of the more longer term, larger scope discussions, which usually is going to be email. Now, personally, that's when you just sit down with somebody and start talking to them. If it's professionally, the nice thing about email is it can give you a history of the conversation. And you may get this through other tools, but email is one that everybody basically has access to. You're going to have an history of that. You're going to be able to walk through at your leisure. You're able to walk through that email and take notes, think about it, do what you need to do. So it should be that the expectation when you send an email is that they're not going to respond immediately, that you're not going to respond immediately. And that goes both ways. So if I send somebody an email, if I get an immediate response, I'm usually shocked. I'm usually surprised. It's like, wow, I didn't expect you to read my email right away and be able to respond. From a professional point of view, I think there's a value in not responding immediately. The whole point is you have this opportunity, and this is actually in all of these, but particularly the longer form things like an email. You have an opportunity to read that email, read it a second time, think about your response, craft something that is not a one line like, okay, I got it, unless it is what you can do with an autoresponder, that basically something that just says, hey, I received your email. I'm going to take a look into it. We'll get back to you within one business day, something along those lines. Now, that's sort of like, I know that's a very big umbrella that I put stuff under, but those are my thoughts. And those are just some of the things that I've got that have, percolated up and developed over the years. And so now I'm going to take that big mess of stuff and set that in your lap for a minute, Michael. And what are your thoughts on these, and how do you handle these varying things? And particularly when we're talking about personal, and also when you've got you've got like primary job versus side hustle stuff, all of these things that mix in. And how do you see this and handle the varying levels of communications?
So to start out with that, one of the things you kind of didn't touch on with the communication is also what type of job you have. If you have just a standard business job and lives aren't at stake, typically you're going to be less likely to respond immediately to a lot of messages. However, and Rob knows this because we both have worked in healthcare sectors or different sectors where lives potentially could be on the line. Software has to be up for mission critical things. In those cases, unfortunately, you are a little more wired into all communications, because if you get an email, a text, or something at 2 o'clock in the morning, typically not necessarily an email, but if you get like a text, a phone call, if you get a communication at that time of day, you typically need to roll out of bed, log into your computer, and find out what's burning. If you're not in a mission critical role, and I've fallen into this trap for many years. Rob knows this. He's the first thing that came to my mind when you're talking about, receiving that email, working till 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember a project we were on where it was like 2 days before New Year's, and all of a sudden our test data stopped working, and we had a presentation on July 3rd, and here I am working through New Year's trying to figure out what the heck happened, and we find out the next day that, oh yeah, this other team changed the APIs. That's why nothing worked. But you don't know that. You have miscommunication because the wrong type of communication is going out, or the lack of communication is going out. Like you said, and one of the things I think prioritizing with all these communication layers these days is, number one, if you get a phone call, that should be number one. You need to just take that. Know that that's a priority. Someone needs to reach you now. Typically, that's number one. That's like mission critical. If they call, something's up. You need to answer. Typically, the second level of immediate communication that I tend to deal with a lot is personal text messages. So I do respond to those. But then once you start getting into the other media types like Slack, Teams, LinkedIn, we'll put social media aside for a moment. So just like Slack, LinkedIn, like Upwork, things like that. Typically, you tend to watch those during business hours, whatever those may be. Now, unfortunately, with me, with side hustles and multiple projects going on, typically a 9 to 5 isn't my typical day. Typically, my day will start maybe at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning while I'm having coffee to make sure I didn't miss anything critical, to maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I tend to watch them a little bit more than I should. Email definitely is the last line of defense. I barely check that maybe 3-4 times a day. Picked up a good habit from the 5-hour work week. Really, business emails I check it like at lunch and like 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then work email isn't checked again for the remainder of the day. Personal email, I tend to check that a little bit more, but I am getting a little bit better with that. But then you throw in the social media channels like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. If you're not dealing with the side hustle, if you're not running a business and you're just working, typically you're going to just be on those when you want to be on those. Just be careful that it does not become a crutch, that's all you're doing, that you're staring at your phone all day and you're just missing life. If you're working, though, if you're running social media campaigns, then you tend to run into that double standard where it's like, okay, am I looking at my phone for personal, or am I looking at my phone for work? So you kind of want to set some boundaries there when you're dealing with social media. It's that you kind of segment the two. And then lastly, before I throw it back to you, Rob, one of the things I've noticed over the last few years, and Apple's great at this, and Google's got it too, is you can now set like do not disturb, which can limit what communications come into your phone at certain times. So now during the business time, I've limited all my personal contacts to just emergency contacts during the day on my phone. So like if someone picks up the phone to call me, it's going to be a work number or a primary contact. Anyone else, it just goes to voicemail. The other cool feature that Apple instituted was like this, like the screen time app or screen time configuration. And now you can actually turn off things that you don't need to be wasting time on, like Facebook, LinkedIn, anything you don't need to be doing during the workday, turn off. Anything you don't need to be doing after your workday, you can turn that off and have that be your personal time. So you can have business time, personal time. And then there's other different things you can do, like you can set up emails and things like that. You could also even turn on, away from like Slack, Teams, and that nature. That's one other thing to be careful of with communication, because if you have that on and you log in at 11 o'clock at night and your boss sees you, your boss may say, oh, he's working. Let me reach out to him. You don't necessarily want to be available all the time, but you do want to be available and work when it is an emergency.
Now that's a great area, is the notifications. And that was just reminding me that I had Gmail on my phone has got an override. So even though I shut everything off, I've got quiet time. It woke me up at 3 a.m. where it was like, and it was silent, but my phone lights up the room when there was some email that came through, and I was like, what the heck is that? So I just made sure I turned off, because it had a allow critical or time critical emails to come through anyways. I'm like, no, there's no such thing as a time critical email for me. So I'm going to shut that off. Now, the thing about the statuses is actually, I think, an invaluable tool to use to communicate with others, particularly because I don't know how many people do it personally, but professionally, a lot of people will sort of keep an eye out of people's statuses on whatever their tool is, whether it's like a Teams or a Slack or something like that. And it's really valuable to have that, but it's also one of those things that be careful how much you use it. Because if you want to go heads down, or if you're in a call, like you're on a meeting or something like that, where you cannot be disturbed or do not want to be disturbed, by all means, put yourself in your busy status or whatever your setting is. But if you're just like, hey, I just don't want anybody to bother me, and I could take a call, but I'm not going to, if you overuse it, then basically everybody's just going to ignore it and just going to send you stuff all the time anyways. Now, that may or may not matter, but it may be something where your device, your tool, your platform batches all that stuff up, so that when you do turn your status back on, it's like, boom, you get flooded with all of that stuff that it was, it had queued up waiting for you to become active again. So check it every so often. It's just the same thing. Now, granted, this is a personal issue or whatever that an itch problem I have with other people sometimes is when you've got an inbox that's got like 4 million different, 4 million items in your inbox. It's like, okay, that's just too much. You've now made that a useless tool to communicate with you. Now, if that's your junk box, awesome. Just delete everything. But don't leave the 20,000 messages there unless you're just trying to say, look, I get a bunch of spam every day, week, year, however long it is. So yeah, I think that is a nice thing. There's a lot of tools out there that are now, and they're people are becoming, and organizations becoming more cognizant about the impact of working 24/7 and helping us find ways to, to sort of get back in saddle of that stuff, so that even though we're remote and we could work anytime, that we don't want to, that we want to work our hours. And don't be afraid to, and by don't be afraid, definitely communicate with your team, particularly if you have an open schedule. Communicate what your hours are. This is again, a personal peeve of mine, because my team works whenever the heck they feel like it. However, and sort of work their way into what hours work best for them, which is fine. It's just, it is very helpful for me and helpful for them actually to know what their hours are. Because if they're not on their, technically not in their working hours, and I send them a request, and it may be that I do it in a way that I'm expecting them to respond fairly quickly because I think they're in working hours. But if they're not, if their status is, active or something like that, or if their status is always away, then I'm going to send that, and I don't have any indicator that, hey, they're on it, this is their schedule. But if I know that, hey, Michael runs he usually doesn't come in until noon and then he works till midnight, then I'll know that. So if I send him something in the morning, then I'm doing it not expecting him to talk to me until later. Or if I'm going to be hesitant, like, to put a phone call in or something, because I'm not calling him at his work desk at that point. I'm interrupting his personal time. So don't be afraid to put that kind of stuff in there. Schedule those things. Especially if you have a place that is very big on calendars, don't be afraid to like block out that, I'm going to go to lunch I'm going to take a 30 minutes lunch and I'm going to be gone. You don't have to put lunch there. Just put, meeting or something. Or if you need to focus on like sometimes like, a review process or training or something like that, block that stuff out so then other people can see, okay, you're not available then, and they'll schedule around it. And if it's an emergency or higher priority, they'll say, hey, can you move something? And then go ahead and do that. Thoughts on that? Actually, closing thoughts on that, because we're going right through this
There's one thing we didn't touch on, and this is something from the AOL days that I think unfortunately has engraved itself into our society. Back when it was really cool to get that little pop-up, you've got mail, has turned into all these beeps, bops, vibrations, whatever, that you are constantly, anxiously, you hear a noise, you think, oh my God, I gotta go check my messages. turn that crap off. If you want to have a life and be sane, turn that off. Or, like Rob was saying, schedule meetings or if use your tools. So, like I said, iPhone allows you to block off time. So you can actually put when you go to sleep. So there's a little thing if you actually set up the alarm for sleep time on the phone, once it hits that, it turns everything off. It will only allow your personal like calendar or contacts to call you directly. Otherwise, everything else is turned off till you actually wake up past your wake up time or you turn that off. Slack has similar features. You can actually put time when your work hours, so it shows you available. Slack also gives you the ability to put in like busy time. So like when I first log in the morning, I'm online. Yes, I'm on Slack, but for the first hour, all my communications are muted. Now, if I have Slack up and I'm watching, sure, I can respond, but it turns off that notification. So I'm not constantly being distracted. I can check my email. I can try to recap what I was doing the previous day. So don't let communication devices, apps rule your life. Take the control back, look at the device, look at the tool, and figure out how it allows you to configure when you're available, when you're not available, and make sure that you are clear with your customers, your friends, your boss, that these are the hours I work. I will only respond during these times. If and only if it is an emergency, call me. Don't leave it all to text messages. If it is a priority one mission control, critical, call. Don't forget, that's the whole point of a phone. It is to call people, not text, not email. That's the computer feature. A phone is a phone. Everything else that they crammed into these things these days is a computer. So with that, take your life back, get that work-life balance back.
I agree, and that's a perfect wrap up for this. I will add only on the quiet time notifications you can do. It's actually that was a life-changing thing for me to be able to just have at night my iPhone just at a certain time it just shuts. It goes into night mode and it doesn't wake up again until the next morning. And I have so really the only people that get a hold of me are close family, like in a few exceptions. Everything else it just sits there. So if I wake up at 3 a.m. and I want to check email or messages, awesome. But if I don't want anybody to get a hold of me, they don't. And the only people that I have there are the ones that it would be, critical or an emergency to do so. So now it's time for you to go out there and like start playing with all your settings, turn off all your notifications, get all your stuff set up. Like these really are key things to making the tools work for us instead of us work, we're slaves to the tools. There is a book, actually, wish I could find it right now. You can go take a look. It's called I think it's called the 40-Day Digital Fast, or it's just called the Digital Fast. And it comes out of fasting and not eating and doing other stuff, but the idea of like getting away from devices. And it's not a throw all your devices out kind of thing. It's really, especially the prep part of it, the first part of the book, where it's like, okay, if you're going to prepare yourself, because we do need digital devices professionally, we use them all the time, but it tells you about it. It's a lot of really cool little things that I didn't know about. For example, last one, and then I'll wrap up, I'll let you guys go, is you can put your iPhone into a black and white mode, so that it is all of the colors and everything like that disappear. It really changes. It's like you don't like looking at your iPhone as much anymore because it's not as pretty. However, you cannot play Wordle because all of those like yellow, green, red squares that you get, they're all black and white now. So if you have something that you do, even though you don't want, you want to have your digital fast, you might have to be careful. That being said, be careful out there. Go out there, have a good time, enjoy shutting off some of your notifications, and we will come back and check her out in with you next time around with whatever our latest little bit of advice, pet peeve, or soapbox moment is. As always, go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. Oh, that was fun. Those are good. Yeah, I think that's, especially as you started talking to it, I was like, I think it's like this is a good episode to have. It's just one of those that I think periodically, especially because we so often talk about um, side hustles and like squeezing every minute out of your day. And I do that. I mean, I'm that person. I get like almost lectured. People are like, why, how do you do that? Why do you do that? I'm like, well, when I get done, there will not be on my grave, he was, he wasted a lot of time. I may have played a lot of games at some point, but no time wasting in there.
Yeah, I hear that
Ah,
all the time. In fact, I was talking to Dave today because of the 400 assessment I'm working on, and he's like, "Dude, how do you find the time to do all this?" It's like, given the fact that I don't like medications, I don't like being medicated. I've had insomnia since I was 16. So you just learn to manage life and fill your time with important things, or not necessarily important things, but things that you like to do versus like taking pills and just being in a haze. You just got to make sure that you balance that stress and relaxation. And as you've known for years, it wanes and flows. And yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's just, you've got to find that balance, and and some of your body adjusts to whatever you make it. So you also have to sort of keep an eye out from a long-term health point of view and things like that. But there are a lot of ways to kill two birds, three birds, 18 birds with one stone. And so it does come down to a little bit working smarter instead of harder and being productive instead of busy. If you can take busy out of your life and just focus on the productive, it is amazing the difference that makes. And it's something I'm reminded about every time when I go from like a season of a lot of meetings where you're just constantly scrambling and doing stuff and not able to focus, to a season or even sometimes within a day where I can just be like, okay, I'm going to go put on my focus music. I'm going to put headphones on. I'm going to listen to some noise and I'm going to just start cranking. And the next thing, no, I've cranked out a lot of stuff because I was able to really focus on it. So
yeah,
that will wrap up this one. Well,
yeah. I was
parting
just
thoughts.
yeah. The point thought to that. Now it kind of boils down a little bit to like the Netflix culture, the whole digital streaming culture, where we've gone from small bite-sized pieces that we can adjust over time to here, let's dump 20 hours worth of a TV show, and now you lose 20 hours of your life, and now you're stressing to try moderation, moderation, people. It even like with what we just talked about with the cell phones, communication, just moderate what you consume can help de-stress your life.
Yeah. Unless you're watching the latest Fallout season, then just go ahead and just like binge the whole thing. Yeah, that's like that's a whole different level of stress is adding on the stuff of like, God, this is a great cliffhanger. I want to watch the next episode and the next episode. And gosh, I'm trying to remember. There was one, I'm trying to think of who did. Oh, I think it was Stranger Things is one of them. They did a brilliant job of changing the episode length and always doing it on something like on some sort of ending where you're like, oh, I got to watch the next episode. And so you just like get into it. And then you think like, oh, they're always about 45 minutes. And you realize, oh, I just did an hour and 20-minute episode or something like that, where they like change around. That's the fun things that, they can do with those kinds. And I think Marvel did that with one or two of their latest ones. Like when they did trying to remember, maybe it was Daredevil or one of those they did even early on. There's some of those they'll play with that stuff, and it's a whole different artistic license you have doing that. It's sort of like podcasts. Sometimes you could be short, and sometimes you can go long.